right. So this will be the last video for this week because remember you have a test coming up on Friday, and I want you to have Wednesday to yourself so that you can kind of like catch up if you're running behind or do some additional problems just to prepare yourself. Thursday, I'm going to be holding office hours as usual, so if you have any questions, please let me know. Today's class, I'm hoping will not be too difficult because basically what we're going to do is we're going to work with inequalities, but with linear functions. So, this week's, not this week, this class will essentially boil down to graphing linear functions. Um, but there's just a little twist to it. But if you know how to graph linear functions, you will be very like you'll find this class fairly straightforward. Okay, so again, it's very easy to graph linear functions, but we're gonna have to make our sketch, I should say, right, more precise. So in this case, if I were to quickly sketch this, right, I know that my slope is positive, my y-intercept is 10. So my function, if I were to graph this, would look something like this. Okay, so right, my y-intercept is 10, slope is positive, so it's rising, and that is it. Okay, and I've answered the question. But to make your sketch more precise, you actually need a second point. And your second point could be anything actually. But sometimes it's always nice to find the x-intercept to you know, uh, the x and y intercept usually make it really easy to graph the function. Okay, but technically you could just work with any point. Okay, but anyway, so for the static question, that's what I'm asking you to do to find the x-intercept, find the root. Okay, root or zero, whatever. Right. So how do you find the root? Well, you have to replace f of x by 0 and then just solve for x. Okay, so plus 10. And then if you solve for x, right, you have to get rid of the 10. So do minus 10, minus 10. This disappears. So minus 10 is equals to 5x. And then just divide out the 5, divide out the 5. So x actually happens to be negative 2, okay? So, and if you want the coordinate, then at minus 2, my y value is 0. Okay, my function is 0. And you have another coordinate, right? And if you want, I can do this on the side, but um, you basically also know what the y-intercept is. Y-intercept is given by f of 0, right? So just replace um, your x value in your function by 0, but everyone knows that 10 is the y-intercept. But how do you find the y-intercept? By definition, just replace x by 0, which is what I'm going to do. So it's going to be 5 times 0 plus 10, which will give me 10. And this is a second coordinate, right? So when x is 0, your y value is 10. And now I can use these 2 points to sketch my graph, and this way it's going to be precise. Okay, so let's quickly do that. Okay, so um, I'm just gonna scale this by 1. So let's say this is 1, and this is also 1. I'm gonna scale both my x and y by 1. Um, Actually, you know what? I'm just gonna um, scale my y by 5 because of this 10. This is pretty high. Okay, so I'm just gonna scale my y's by 5 so that it's a little easier for me to graph. Okay, so this is minus 1, this is minus 2. So at minus 2, my function is at 0, and, right? So this is, I'm talking about this point over here. And at 0, my function is at 10. So this has to be 10. And there you go, okay? And then you can just connect the two dots. And because it's a linear function, right, everything else will just fall into place, okay? You don't have to I'm just going to do this. Okay, you don't have to, you only have to use two dots. Okay, if you use a third one, then your function will just cross the third dot. Okay, you only need two because everything else will just align automatically. Okay, remember you only need 2 points to draw a unique to yeah, you need 2 points to draw a unique line. Okay, once you have your 2 points, then your line becomes unique. Okay, with 1 point it's not unique. Okay, but anyway, I'm not going to go too much into detail, but this is basically what your function looks like when it's equal to that. Okay, but today we're going to change the focus from equality to inequality. Okay, so graph, they're asking you to graph this. So this is an inequality. So how do you graph this? Okay, in a very similar fashion, we're gonna change this into an equality and solve for y. But before I do that, I guess let's answer part B, because part B is um, um, a question that can easily be answered. So they're asking you determine if the point 1, 3 is part of the solution. Okay, so how do you determine that? Just replace your x value by 1 and your y value by 2, and y value by 3 actually, right? Because this is if you want, this is your x, right? This is your x and that's your y. So replace x by 1, y by 3, and see if it satisfies this inequality. Okay, so let's check. I'm doing part B first. So 4 times 1 plus 2 times 3. Is it greater than, I'm just going to put in a question mark, is it greater than or equal to 10? So 4 times 1 is 4. 2 times 3 is 6. 4 plus 2, 4 plus 6 is actually 10. So is 10 greater than equals to 10, right? Again, I'm just putting a question mark on top because you have to answer this question. Okay, so is this true? Yes, it is. Okay, because this will only be true if the value on the left hand side is 10 or higher. Okay, so 11, 10.5, all of them will satisfy this inequality. Okay, so this point happens to be part of your solution. Why? Because if you plug it in, right? If you plug it into your inequality, there is no contradiction. Okay, so yeah, so you could just um, check if this is actually true. So again, you could put the question mark over here if you want, and then at the end you can just check it off, right? Yes, it is true. You're asking a question at the beginning, and then once you simplify, you get 10. So is 10 greater than or equal to 10? Yes, it is. Okay, so now the question becomes, how do you graph this? Okay, so let's do part A. I might need a second page because I'm taking too much space, but that's fine. So let's do question A. Let's do this in red. So it's hard to graph an inequality. So let's just focus on the equality. Okay, so let's just change the question to why don't we graph 4x plus 2y is equals to 10. Okay, and then I'll show you how to change this, how to use the equality and then graph the inequality. Okay, so again, whenever you're graphing function, make sure you have this form, y is equals to mx plus b, because then you have your y-intercept, and you can find your x-intercept afterwards, and then use those 2 points to get a precise sketch. Okay, so let's move the minus 4x over to the other side, right? So I'm going to do minus 4x on both sides. That leaves me with 2y is equals to, because the mx comes before b, why don't we write the minus 4x first, and then the 10 is positive, so plus 10. And finally, just be careful here, you have to divide by 2, because remember, you have to have y all by itself. So when you divide by 2, you actually have to divide everything by 2. Okay, so this will become y, because the 2's will cancel out. But here you have to divide your negative 4 by 2, which becomes negative 2 x, and then divide the 10 by 2, which gives you 5. Okay, so just be careful when you're dividing. Okay, so just like multiplication, right? When you multiply this by 2, right, you have to distribute the 2 to each term. It's the same thing with division. Okay, you have to distribute the division basically to each term, and this is what I get. Okay, and I'm pretty confident that all my students can easily, right, graph this equation. Okay, so again, find the x-intercept. You already know what the y-intercept is, right? So y-intercept is right, your y-intercept is y is equals to 5, right, using this fact. um, right, so that's the point when x is 0, right? So the coordinate is this. Okay, so that's easy. Now let's find the x-intercept. So x-intercept happens when y is equals to 0. So I'm going to replace this y by 0. Okay, and then just solve for x. Okay, so when you do the algebra, right, I'm going to do this very quickly. So minus 5, this disappears. So minus 5 is equals to minus 2x. And then you can just divide by minus 2, divide by minus 2. X will be 2.5. Okay, so that means your right? This is your x-intercept, but the coordinate is at 2.5. Your function will be, the function value will be 0, right? So why don't we use these 2 points to quickly sketch the function, okay? So in this case, I think it makes sense to increase my, I mean, you could increase everything by 1 if you wanted to, that would be fine. So once you have your 2 points, you can kind of like decide how you would scale your Cartesian plane, right? In my case, I'm just gonna scale everything by 1, because 5 is not that big of a number. So if I scale everything by 1, it should be fine. So why don't I do that? Okay, so this is x, this is y, this is basically 1, and this also is 1. So that means this has to be 2, and then I have 3 and 4. And do I have any minuses? No, right? So let's just say -1. And then this will be 2, this will be 3, this will be 4, and this will be 5. Okay. So at 0, right? At 0, my function is at 5. And at 2.5, my function is at 0. Okay, so this is 2, 2.5 will be right in between. And this is basically what my function looks like. And I'm just going to make sure that it crosses this dot. And then let's just extend this. Okay, so this is your function. Y is equals to, what was it? Minus 2x plus 5. Okay, so not that difficult to graph this. Okay, but what you should be graphing is, right, if you solve for y, in this case, if you solve for y, you're going to be getting y is greater than equals to um, minus 2x plus 5, okay? So maybe that's the first thing that you should do. Just solve for y over here, and then put the equal sign underneath if you want, okay? So I need to graph this, okay? I need to graph this, but I'm going to use this fact to get to this inequality. Okay, so y is greater than minus 2x plus 5. What does that mean? Okay, here y is equals to, so when y is equals to minus 2x plus 5, this is your y value. Okay, it has to be exactly on this line. All the y values have to be on this line. Okay, but if y is greater than, so again, this line over here is y is equals to minus 2x plus 5. But if y is greater than that, then that means that everything on top of your function, okay, everything on top is also included. All this is also included, okay? So because y is here, y is greater than minus 2x plus 5, okay? Greater than means make sure you greater than or equals to, right? Now I should say greater than or equals to means that everything on top needs to also be included, okay? So this line over here, which is your y, which is equals to 2x minus 2x plus 5, right? This is already included, but you also have to include everything on top of it. Okay, so if it's greater than, if y is greater than equals to minus 2x plus 5, everything on top will be included. If it's less than, maybe let me use a different color. If it's less than, if y is less than minus 2x plus 5, then everything underneath this line will have to be included, okay? Everything underneath, okay? So you kind of have two possibilities, okay? If it's greater than, then it makes sure everything on top is included. If it's less than, then everything underneath has to be included, okay? Um, but you also have two other possibilities, right? The two other possibilities is, what if y is strictly greater than minus 2x plus 5? What happens then, okay? What happens then is that it's exactly the same thing, except that now this line over here, let me use purple. Okay, so this line over here will not be a straight line, it will be a dotted line. Okay, so you'll have to put a dotted line over here to indicate that you're not including this line, you're excluding it. Okay, and I'll show you an example of that in a while. Okay, so let's just Let's just focus on greater than or equals to, less than or equals to for now. Okay, so this basically means that everything on top will also be included, and this one tells you everything underneath or um, right at the bottom will have to be included. Okay, so that's basically how you graph an inequality. Okay, so just solve for y, which is what I did over here, right? Solve for y, then change this inequality into a equality, right? Everyone can graph this function, I'm hoping by now. I've shown you how to do that, right? Find the y-intercept, find the x-intercept, connect the 2 points, you have your graph. And then go back to the original question. If it's greater than or equal to, make sure you're including everything on top. If it's less than or equal to, then make sure you're including everything underneath. Okay, so um, this is the example that I want you to do. It's given on page 466. Okay, so I have given, I've drawn the solution for you over here. So if you find your x and y intercept, your y intercept is 0, comma 2. Well, your y intercept is actually 2, but the coordinate of that is 0, comma 2. Your x intercept happens to be a 3, and the coordinate of this is 3, 0. Right? So once you find those 2 points, you can scale this by 1. You can easily graph this. And look, if you solve for y over here, right, which I'm going to ask you to do, whatever it is, you're going to have y is less than or equals to something. Okay, because it's less than or equal to, I'm shading the region underneath my line. Okay, so you could draw the arrows if you want, but or you could just shade it, but make sure you're shading it underneath. Why? Because y has to be less than or equals to that. Okay, so try this out. I'm just giving you the solution so that you can compare your answers. Oh, and there is a typo actually for question B. So let me just do this in purple. So question B, there is a typo. In your textbook, they're asking you to determine whether this point is part of the solution, but they're not using this point. They're actually using the point 2 comma 4. And as you can see, 2 comma 4 will be somewhere up here, right? If this is 2, then this is probably 4. So it's not within your region. Okay, anything that falls within this region is good, but one way to check is to replace the point 2 comma 4 in here and see if it satisfies that inequality, and you'll see that it doesn't. Okay, so algebraically, it will not satisfy this inequality, but what do you mean by um, what, what do you mean by a solution graphically? Graphically, if it's a solution, then it will have to be within your region. Okay, so this is your region over here in green. Okay, so down here, any point in this region, any point is is a solution. Okay, any point in this region is a solution. Even the points that are on your line will also be a solution. So this is a solution, this is a solution, and you can verify that, right? If you plug in 0, 2 in your equation, there should not be a problem. If you plug in 3, 0, there should not be a problem. The points that I'm going to draw in blue, like these points over here, they are not in your region. So whatever their coordinates are, if you plug it in this equation over here, or in this, if you plug it in here, and see if those the coordinates of those points, if they satisfy this inequality, you'll see that it will not. Okay, so just be careful. Your textbook is using the point 2 comma 4, not minus 2 and 4. Okay, that's why it's not a solution. It's not part of your solution because it's not in your region. Okay, and this is the point that they're talking about. So maybe yeah, so this is the point. 2 comma 4 will actually be somewhere, maybe somewhere up. So 2 comma 4 is somewhere over here. Okay, so as you can see, visually it's not within your region, right? And if you plug it in here, kind of like how I showed you to do so in the previous question, right? You will see that whatever that number is, it will not be less than or equals to 6. Okay, so there's two ways of verifying this. I think the best way is to just plug it in here, because then you don't have to draw a graph and or anything like that. Okay, so now let's move on to the next question. So again, now same question, they're asking me to graph this, which might be a little challenging, right? But the only difference here is that now it's not, my inequality is strict. Okay, it's strictly less than 0. So what I'm going to do is, right, the idea is to just solve for y. Okay, so there's many ways of doing it. I'm just going to move the 20 over to the other side. So that gives me 5x is less than 20y. And then what you have to do is just divide by 20 to solve for y, right? So this tells you that, um, so when you divide this out, right, you're going to get 1. 5 divided by 20 is just 1 over 4, right? Because again, you can simplify this fraction, right? 5 divides 5, and then you get 1. 5 divides 20, so you get 4, right? So this works out to be 1 over 4 x, and y has to be greater than that. Okay, and if this is kind of bothering you, you can rewrite this as y is greater than 1 over 4x. Okay, so I've just rewritten this, right? Y is still greater. I've just rewritten it so that it looks nicer. Now it's hard to graph an inequality, so let's focus on y is equals to 1 over 4x, right? Using this, so I'm going to compare this to y is equals to mx plus b. So I know that my b value, or the y-intercept, is 0, right? So my y-intercept is 0. So at 0, right, so when x is equals to 0, my y value is 0, and my y-intercept and the x-intercept are the same in this case. Okay, so this is what the function will look like. So let's just okay, so at 0 my function is at 0, but when x will be 4, okay, your denominator kind of tells you how to scale your x-axis. Okay, so if your denominator is 4, a wise thing to do will be to increase, or you scale your x-axis by 4 to avoid fractions. Okay, so at 4, right, if I plug in 4 into my equation, I'm going to get 1. Okay, because a quarter times 4 basically gives me 1. Next point that I'm going to plug in my function, a wise point to plug, is 8. Okay, and if this is kind of confusing you, then just draw a table on the side. Okay, so this is my x, this is my y. At 0, I'm at 0. If I plug in 4 into my function, I'm going to get 1. If I plug in 8, I'm going to get 2. Okay, um, so at 4, I am at 1. At 8, I'm going to be at 2. And again, you only need 2 points, but I'm just giving you a third one. Now, so this is my line, right? So if I connect the dots, I'm going to have my function, sorry, if I connect these 3 dots, then I'm going to have my function, this function over here. Okay, so let me just clean this up a little bit. So if I connect my dots, I'm going to have this function. But I need to actually not graph this. I need to graph this function over here. Okay. Now, because y is greater and there is no equal sign underneath, I need to make this line dotted. Okay. So I'm just gonna intelligently, I guess, just remove some, just create some space, right? Right. We're gonna make them social distance, okay, from one another, right? So let's just create some room over here, and there you go. Okay, so now because there's no equal sign, right? I have to make sure that my line is dotted, and because y is greater, then that means I have to focus on the region that's on top. Okay, so y is greater, so I have to draw arrows on top. So this is basically my region of solution. Okay, so if you pick any point within this region, it will satisfy your inequality. Okay, so for example, this point over here, right, has coordinate, my x coordinate is 0 and my y coordinate is 1, right? And if you plug in 0 for x, and 1 for y, you will see that it's going to be true. Okay, so if I plug in 1, then y is just 1, and 0 times a quarter is 0. So 1 is actually greater than 0, right? So this point will work, and any point in this region will actually satisfy my inequality. Okay, so if you want, why don't we pick the point 4 comma 2? Let's pick this one. Okay, this is the point 4 comma 2, and you'll see that that will also work. So that means my y value is 2. So if you replace y by 2, let's check if 2 is actually greater, I'm just putting a question mark just to see, is 2 greater than a quarter times, so this is, see, this is the point, um, 4 comma 2. Okay, so if I replace x by 4, so is 2 greater than 1? Yes, it is. Okay, so any point in this region will satisfy your inequality. Okay, so that's how you find the region. I hope this is kind of making sense. Okay, again, it's as simple as drawing a linear function. Okay, so just make sure that you're drawing a linear function. I drew this linear function very rapidly. Again, you can use a table of value to help you. Okay, and if you are getting fractions, then look at your denominator, scale your x-axis um, with the um, with the help of your denominator. Okay, if your denominator is 4, then make sure you're increasing your x-axis by 4. If it's 8, then increase by 8. Okay, so your denominator will kind of guide you. And don't worry about the y-axis. I think y-axis usually, just scale them by either 1 or 2 and you'll get away with it. So don't worry too much about that. Right, so graph this function, this simple linear function. And then once you've graphed this one, then go back to your inequality, right? If it's strictly greater, then make sure your line is dotted. Okay, it should not be straight line. Okay, make sure that it's dotted, kind of like what I did. And if it's greater, then your region has to be on top. Okay, so if y is greater, then your region has to be on top. If it's less than, then your region has to be underneath. Okay. And finally, this question. So here they are giving you this region, right? And they are asking you to figure out the inequality that would represent this graph. Now remember, as you can see, this line is not dotted, right? It's not dotted. It's actually um, a connected line, okay? So that means that my inequality will be y either less than or equals to or greater than or equals to, okay, one or the other. But as you can see, my values, my region is on top of this line, okay? So all my values are on top of this line. So the region is on top. So that means y has to be greater than or equals to mx plus b, okay? You don't know. So this information should be fairly straightforward, right? First of all, um, make sure that your inequality is not strict, right? Make sure that there's an equal sign. Why? Because your line is not dotted. Okay, so the equal sign has to be there. Secondly, because the region is on top of your line, it has to be greater than. Okay, so this piece of information is really easy to figure out. The I guess the tricky part is to figure out what the slope is and what the b value is, and you did that in grade 10. Okay, so all you need is 2 points. Actually, you only need 1 point because your y-intercept is fairly visible, right? So this is your y-intercept. So that means b is actually equals to -2. And now all you need is to figure out what the slope is. So to find the slope, right, m, remember, is equals to the change in y divided by the change in x. Also, you've probably seen this notation, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So to find the slope, you actually need 2 points. One of the points is already given to you. And use precise points, right? I think this one is pretty precise too. So you have this point at 0, y value is -2, and this point over here at -1, y value is 0. So using these 2 points, you can find your slope. So I'm gonna um, use this point to be x2 comma y2, which means this point will be my x1 comma y1. Okay, and again, you could have chosen this to be x2 y2. It's really a question of choice. Okay, so once you define them, just be consistent. So my y2 value is -2 and my y1 value is 0. So -2 minus 0, right? Now my x2 is 0 and my x1 is -1. So minus, right? x2 minus, now x1 is -1. So let's just put -1 in brackets. And when you do this, you're going to get -2 on top because -2 minus 0 is just -2. And 0 minus -1 is 0 plus 1, which is just 1. So your slope is actually -2. And it should be negative because as you can see, this function is actually decreasing, right? It's decreasing, so your slope has to be negative. And your equation, right? The equation of this line, you have it. Okay, the equation of this line is actually, um, I'm just gonna write it up here. So y is equals to minus 2x, and my b value is also minus 2. So it's minus 2x minus 2. But remember, because you have a region, right? Because you have a region, um, you need to write this as an inequality. Okay, so your final answer will be y is greater than equals to minus 2x minus 2. Okay, so this is how you would find the equation. Okay, so right, again, finding the inequality is not that difficult. The only tricky part is to find the equation of the line. And in most cases, it's very simple because the y-intercept might be directly given to you. Okay, um, and your slope, right? Just use 2 points, any 2 points. I've chosen these ones because they were precisely given, but this point is also precisely given. So you could choose any 2 points, um, and you will get the slope value of -2. Okay, so try doing this question. This is given to you on page 469, but here is your answer. Okay, again, um, this will be a strict inequality. Why? Because your line is dotted. Okay, so that's why it's strict. And why is it greater? Because your values are on top of this line. You see, on top of it, not underneath. So it has to be greater than, strictly greater than, because it's dotted, right? Only tricky part over here is to figure out what your um, what the equation of the line is. So equation of the line is y is equals to mx plus b. B value is given to you, right? Your y-intercept is actually 1, which is where the 1 is coming from. Um, all you need to do is basically find the slope. Okay, so I'm hoping this wasn't too difficult, but let me know if you have any questions. Send me an email. I will also be available on Thursday to answer any questions during my office hours. So for homework, I just want you to practice on page 72. Do question 1A, 2A, question 4, 9A, and B, and I think that should be sufficient. Again, there's not going to be a new video on Wednesday because I want you to use that time to catch up if you're running behind, or do your homework, because remember on Friday you will have a test. So just make sure to use your time wisely on Wednesday. And if you have any questions, please join me during my office hours on Thursday. Okay, but this is it for this week. So yeah, so thank you so much for your time. You guys have a nice day. Okay, take care. Bye.